Welcome to the fifth event in our series, the PPBSO in Conversation, organized by the Pipers and Pipe Band Society of Ontario. My name is Andrea Boyd, and I'm a member of the PPBSO Music Committee, and I'm pleased to be here with our guest today, Bill Livingstone. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Andrea.
So I'll just offer a short introduction to Bill before we get started. So as many of you know, Bill is a world-renowned piper, and he was born in Coppercliff, Ontario. He's won almost every major solo piping prize in light music and Pibroch, including the Highland Society of London Gold Medal and the clasp at the Northern Meeting in 1981 and 1984. As pipe major of the 78 Frasers Highlanders Pipe Band, he made history by leading them in 1987 to become the first non-Scottish band to win the World Pipe Band Championships. He led the band for nearly 3 decades, amassing numerous championship titles in North America and top 6 finishes at the World Pipe Band Championships in Scotland. In addition to being a very successful competitor and competition band, the band pushed the boundaries of tradition in music and innovation in its medleys and its concert performances. Bill has made several solo recordings and pipe band recordings and has published 2 collections of music and a memoir. Bill is in high demand around the world as an instructor and an adjudicator. So Bill, welcome. Where do we begin?
You begin where you want to begin, Andrea, and I'll try and catch up.
So, Bill, I'd like to start off by asking you about some of your early instruction, your introduction to piping with your father, and some of your early influences in piping.
Well, we can probably save the audience a fair bit of time if I suggest, without being too commercial and self-promoting about it, that they buy the memoir, because it's all set out there in some great detail. But the abbreviated story is this. My dad was a very good piper, and he was taught by a man named Pipe Major Davy Hendry in Ayrshire. Davy Hendry is a man who taught David Kay, who in turn taught Gordon Walker. So there's a real rooted connection to Ayrshire.
Sure.
My dad came to Canada and ultimately came to the Sudbury area, where he found work at the Inco smelter, where he worked all of his working life. It was hard scrabble work, but he was a tough guy and managed to get through it all pretty much unscathed. He was teaching my older brother, Ranald, and they would be sitting at the kitchen table with practice chanters. And I was somewhere around 5 years of age, and I could not stand being left out of the fun. So I'd rumble around on the floor under the table, and if I wasn't getting the attention I thought I deserved, I would punch one of them or both of them in the most delicate area that a man can be punched in to grab their attention. So finally, they took the sensible position that they should get me off the floor and get me onto the table with them.
And include you.
And include me and give me a little boy's practice chanter. And that's how it started. So I started when I was about 5.
Wow. And you played all through your teenage years, but you did take a break, didn't you, when you
I did. I played a lot. I played a lot as a young boy. Because my dad was the pipe major of a pipe band in Sudbury called the Coppercliff Highlanders, and there was a lot of activity in piping there, and he taught a lot of people, and so I just tagged along for the ride. But by the time I was 16 or 17, I had really learned an awful lot of tunes, and my dad was a good player, and he was a good, correct player, and he taught me all the fundamentals in a good and correct way. And then somewhere around age 17, my family bought a piano. My mother was a piano player, And I discovered this piano and started banging away on it for my own enjoyment. And I was in love with the likes of Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis. And so we had a kind of a beautiful looking 78 RPM record player. Now, the young people listening to this won't have a clue what that is, but it is a record player that you drop a needle on, and it revolves at 78 RPM. And I listened to that and listened to that until I was able to start picking up some of the very simple riffs that came off these piano players. And so I started imitating that. And the first thing you know, I had a little rock and roll band, and that carried on for several years, actually. I ended up putting my way through university, playing in the bars in Sudbury. Not the ideal kind of environment for a young student, but I did it, and it was a hoot. It was a riot. I mean, it was just the kind of thing you would dream of doing. And all through that time, my dad was my only really teacher, except for one small period when I was 14. John Wilson, the great John Wilson with the mutilated fingers, heard me at a contest in Sault Ste. Marie and went to my father and said, you could send that boy to me. I could probably make something out of him for you. And so they did. They sent me to live in Toronto with an elderly couple, Scottish couple. And I joined the 48th Highlanders, and I would go to band practice there and at the Earl's Court Legion pipe band. And that all worked beautifully until my parents came down to check on me. And the lady of the house, her name was Lizzie Bly, if you can imagine, just such a more Dickensian name than that. And she was cooking dinner for all of us, and they had a gas stove. And she got into the cooking sherry a bit ferociously and used a newspaper to try and light the oven. And of course, kaboom! And so I was home from there in very short order. And that was the only pibroch instruction I ever had until I was finished law school.
Wow. Okay. So then did you what got you back into the pibroch? Was it your tuition with John Wilson, and then, did he encourage you to go to Scotland to compete?
No, he didn't. He didn't do that at all. First of all, John was a very practical guy, and when you went for a lesson with him, it wasn't about a scansion of lines and pulsing and any of it. None of that. It was do as I am doing, and when you can do that, then you'll be able to play. With John, it was very pragmatic and kind of very, very direct, uncomplicated tuition, but it was good. I mean, I learned some in the short time that I was with him. Then I learned, I learned the Big Spree, and I learned the Bells of Perth and Sir James MacDonald of the Isles and all of that. So it gave me a kind of an idea of what pibroch was about. But the more important thing was that my father had 2 LPs, again, kids, LPs, long playing records that revolved at 33 1/3 RPM. And they were recordings of John D. Burgess and Captain John McClellan playing pibroch only. And I heard them up when I was at home in Coppercliff, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought, holy moly, what is this? And so I listened to them over and over and over again. And like most pretty good musicians, there's a whole lot of ear learning that goes on in things like this. So I learned the Battle of the Pass of Crieff and the Lament for the Viscount of Dundee and Black Donald's March. From these recordings, they were not my reading of it was not perfect. It can't be. You need one-on-one instruction. There's no doubt. But that just captured me so much, and it stuck with me. So when I finished law school, I know what happened. Lily and I were at the CNE, and the 48th Highlanders were playing in a bandstand. There used to be a bandstand. There may still be, and it was. I was like drawn like a moth to flame. The sound of the bagpipes sounding over, and listened and thought, man, why am I? How can I be missing this? This is the greatest stuff ever. And so I went and looked up John Wilson. Do you remember me, Mr. Wilson? Yes, I do. Would you take me for lessons? Yes, I will. I live here at this address up in North Toronto. And I started in about, I don't know, January of 1969 with John Wilson.
Mm.
So that was my first real serious pipe instruction.
And then it was shortly after that that you had your success in Scotland, in the 70s, traveling across there. Did you go around the games in Scotland?
I did. Lily and I did. We went together. We had, I was a struggling young lawyer. Lily had given up work, quite rightly, because she said, this is enough. I've put you through law school and blah, 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 blah. So now it's my turn. You go and earn the money. And so I was working as a lawyer, not making really very much money at all. But we would go to Scotland, and in order to make the trip possible financially, we had to find a way to make our transportation our accommodation. So we would rent what they called caravanettes, which are like Volkswagen vans with an accordion roof that would lift up. And so I could play in this van with all of the heaters, because it's so damn cold over there, with all of the heaters going full blast and steam roaring down the windows. And we went around all the games. So it was Cowell and Ballater and Braemar and Aboyne and Inverary and all those things, and then Portree, and finally Oban and Inverness, about which I knew nothing. I didn't even know what a gold medal was, but I did know that I had to have a certain number of tunes from a list. Sure. And so you asked me when we were preparing for this a question about the set tunes and whether they're such a great idea. Here's what I think. When I was competing over there in the early years, I was able to play in what is now called the Senior Piver at Oban. I don't know what it was called in those days, but it was the equivalent of the clasp in Inverness. And so you had a set list of tunes for that. And then you had a set list of tunes for the gold medal. Mm-hmm. And then if you're playing at Portree, it was another set list of tunes. They were all McCrimmon tunes. Mm-hmm. And there would be some overlap with that, but not a whole lot. And so I was learning and carrying in what I thought was competition quality, maybe 12, 14 tunes a summer. And you see what that did for me? Nothing but good. It did nothing but good. It just made me learn all of these tunes. And John McFadden once said to me, once you get to about a dozen tunes, something happens to your ability to understand the music, and it just gets better and better from there. And that's what I found. Mm-hmm. The more I played, the more I learned, the more I competed, and the more I listened, the better it got.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we look this year at the gold medal, silver medalists being own choice tunes, and that'll carry over for next year. But you're right, having that sort of repertoire of 6 and 8 tunes, that you need to prepare for Oban and Inverness, and then another 4 to 6 tunes for the Dunvegan competitions in Skye. And yeah, you're carrying a dozen tunes, and that does help you build your repertoire and your stamina. And And so, you know, looking at, on the other hand, with set tunes, you're being introduced to perhaps tunes you might not have taken up otherwise, and you do build your repertoire every year if you continue to play those tunes that you've collected over the years.
I agree. I mean, I had to learn The Men Went to Drink. God, what a tedious business that was. And I know lots and lots of pipers think that The Blind Piper's Obstinacy is a wonderful piece of work. You know, I learned them, and I did the best I could with them, and it was all right. But there were things I learned, and I learned stuff about Peever by learning to play them and practicing to play them. And remember, throughout all of this time, I was having, I don't know, maybe the best tuition of any piper of my generation has ever had.
Yeah, that was very, very, very fortunate. And what was the atmosphere like in Scotland then? There probably weren't that many overseas players going around the games and competing.
You can't be delicate about this kind of thing. It was not really at all welcoming. I can remember very great pipers sitting in my presence at a ceilidh and some drinks after whatever the event was. And you see, these Canadian boys, you know, they're all technique. And they have no bloody music, man. I hate that. I would just take a boy who can play the music and make a mistake. Well, that's fine. And that was directed clearly at me. And that's okay. I got over it. I didn't put a knife to my veins. So, but that was kind of the idea. There's a great story about see, pipers in Scotland in those days, and it may be the same now. I don't know, but it was very much a manly, masculine kind of undertaking. And so pipers didn't bring their wives. I couldn't understand that, because everywhere I went in piping, I took Lily with me, because God Almighty, she's the love of my life, and she, you know, and she got to enjoy it, and she got to like it, and all of that. In fact, she got really good at adjudicating it. And I'll just tell you that I had a lesson with a piper not too long ago, and I was on Skype, and she came in when it was finished and said, so he could hear it, "That was really good." So anyway, I think it might have been at the Portree Games up on what they call the Lump, which is this crazy thing, the geographical feature. And there was a tent for the pipers. And all around the tent were little shrines that each piper created for himself. So it would be a pipe case, and maybe a bonnet, and a couple of cans of Tennant's, and so on. So there was one of these every 10 or 15 feet. And I said, it was freezing cold, which was always a problem for me playing over there, but it was freezing cold. And I said, Lily, come on in. It's too cold out there. Come on in. And the minute she came in, there were several pipers who turned their backs to the center of the tent and began micturating, urinating violently to make a point. And
ladies not welcome here.
Ladies not welcome here. Now, the world has changed, thank God for that. But she never went into another piper's tent ever.
Oh, well, that's a funny story. I don't know if we've departed completely from that scenario, but definitely things have improved.
Things are better. Hey, listen, Andrea, you and I are talking. Hey,
we're having a great chat. Exactly. So I want to, you know, that we're talking about you playing in the solos, you know, in the 70s and into the 80s, and then at the same time, you know, what was going on in the band scene and the solos in Ontario? Were there other pipers that were going across kind of then? And then how did that lead to the start of the bands that you were in with the Toronto band and General Motors and then the Frasers?
I'm not sure there was really a direct connection. Ed and I was going over. I was, and Bob Worrell was going over until his work interfered with his ability to go to Oban and Inverness, and so he retired from competition. A sad and ridiculous end to a sterling career. So there weren't very many of us going over there in the early days, and I played in the General Motors pipe band, kind of on and off. And then I decided I decided I was going to chase these mystical gold medals, and in order to gain a gold medal, you must be obsessive. You must be completely devoted and obsessive. It's quite bizarre. It's not healthy, but that's what achieves the goal that you have in your heart. And so, after several years of doing that and getting my success going, George Campbell and John Mackenzie came to me to have a meeting here in our home, and they were pressing me to take over the GM pipe band. I didn't want to. I had no interest in running a pipe band, but they were quite persuasive and insistent, so I took over the band, and it wasn't very long until that fell apart. And then I think I got into cabaret somehow, and I didn't take very long for me to make a ruination of that band and its great history. And then we got the GM band going again, and Ian Symington was a member of the band, and he was also associated with the 78th Frasers Regiment. I don't know how that happened, but he had friends in there, and they were calling him frequently they needed a piper for functions, and Ian proposed to them that they should get a pipe band, and they thought that was a fine idea. And so what they did was they outfitted us in those wonderful orange kilts, which sadly I agreed to change, one of the worst mistakes in my piping career. But still, they outfitted us in those, and they gave us, I think, $5,000 a year for a couple of years. I mean, when you think about what a pipe band needs, it was really quite a pittance. And then they just pulled their sponsorship. They couldn't afford it. And we were left on our own. So from there until probably to this day, there's no support for the 78th Frasers. They support themselves. It's pretty hard going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. But you built that band, and of course, started going across to play at the Worlds and gaining success. And many people would have said that you were, had a very successful run in 1986, and then of course won the championship in 1987. What was it like, kind of having to prepare for that level of competition through the long Ontario winters, between 86 and 87, thinking, but what do we need to do to win,
Andrea, I think I don't think this is pie in the sky stuff to say that initially, and maybe for quite a long time, we were not really concerned too much with the prize. It was an odd kind of a mixture of ages and talents and things. The whole thing was very organic. Mm. Nobody came to it with a plan. I didn't have a plan. I know when we won the Worlds, I was riffing on to the BBC about we had this 5-year plan and so on. It was nonsense. I didn't know what else to say. But then I heard year after year, oh, we're on a 5-year plan, a 3-year plan. It's like that.
I must have heard that from you, Bill.
It's true, and there wasn't any of that. It was just so organic. And look, look at the influences that came to me. Jerry Quigg, an amazing thinker about music and a source of music, and put me on to Irish stuff that I'd never have dreamed of. Alan Stivell, the great Celtic harpist. John Walsh, I mean, a master of tone and how to get it. And Bruce and Michael making stuff that had never ever been heard of before. And for me, people have often asked me, was it hard? How did you keep control of these people? It wasn't an issue of that at all. Everybody was just kind of saying, hey, wow, why don't we try that? That sounds like fun. They were all young, they were energetic, and they were willing to take the risk, because nobody ever dreamed that we could do it. Now, certainly in the last couple of years before we knocked it off, it was pretty clear we were good enough to do that. But, I'm asked, what is the secret of a great pipe band? There's no magical secret. It's talent. That's all it is. You got talent, you've got a chance.
But you had a lot of aspiration there, and people that really wanted to play music together and play good music together, and push the boundaries with composition and other musical styles, like you mentioned, the Irish music and Breton music. I mean, that's a big component of, I would have imagined.
It was, because it made the band attractive to listeners, because it was so different from what anybody else was doing. A little story, and I don't want to demean Reed Maxwell with telling you this story, because I think he's one of the greatest lead drummers in the world, and he's the greatest lead drummer I ever played with. He is really remarkable. But he came straight to us from Dysart and Dundonald. He might have been a whole 18 years of age, and cocky and a chip on his shoulder and all. I wouldn't have him. I just couldn't tolerate it. But when we got to be doing the Little Cascade, mm-hmm. He didn't understand, because Bob Shepherd had stolen our Little Cascade arrangement, as he did so many other of our pieces of music, when he was over here judging. And so Reed was indoctrinated into, which is like awful in a pipe band. And I tried to get him to understand that what we were doing was a bossa nova rhythm. Well, he didn't need to be told twice. He got that, and he nailed it, and it was just so wonderful. And that's one of the reasons the band was so strong and energetic. Reed and I were cut from the same cloth. I'm older than Reed, considerably actually, but at that time I was a real hell dammer, a real front end of the beat kind of guy, and Reed is every bit the same way. And so when you hear the Frasers from that era, it's remarkable, the energy and the forward motion and all of that, because we thought the same way. And this is what really gets me. When we went and did Live in Ireland and brought on board some of the greatest pipe band people on the planet, mm-hmm. What did we end up with when we played that repertoire? The 78th Frasers style. It was amazing. It was amazing. And everybody loved it and had a great time. And it was, well, on top of that, it was the greatest sort of brotherhood celebration you could ever want.
Well, I mean, and that's just it. When we preparing for this interview, talking about concert repertoire and how the pipe band was so much more than just a competitive band. And I remember, being a little girl, going up to Cayley Music and Antigonish to get the Live in Ireland recording, and then subsequently, the Megantic Outlaw recording, and like that became your calling card. The band's calling card was the repertoire that you built for these concerts, and you were a concert band in many ways as much as you were a successful competitive band.
I would have to say that doing concerts was as much a thrill to me as anything else in the pipe band. I adored that. And I adored the preparation. And now, and as we moved along, our concerts became more and more sophisticated. So we would have a concert that was a complete, like the operas, like a libretto. There was a story from start to middle to end, and we would build a concert around that concept. It's not so easy to do that. In fact, it's hard. But boy, oh boy, the impact and the joy of making that kind of music, just terrific.
And concerts took you to, a lot of different places, a lot of different communities around the world where you met forged a lot of friendships and musical collaborative friendships as well.
Yes, indeed. God knows where I haven't been, but it's New Zealand and San Francisco and on all over the U.S. Just tremendous fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And musically satisfying. And that's the thing.
How do you I think now about bands and doing concerts, and that there aren't nearly as many concerts now, and why do you think that is? Because I've always thought that the more concerts and the more repertoire you have as a band, the better you will be as a band.
No question. I absolutely agree, Andrea, with that. I think that it's like carrying 14 P-bricks, when I was starting out. If you build an enormous repertoire of complex music for your band, and I say build it, I mean, this stuff doesn't happen by force of will. It's all very serendipitous. Somewhere along the line, somebody comes up with an idea, and there you are. I mean, Michael was particularly good at this kind of stuff, and he was very impatient. When the Megantic Outlaw was conceived, Michael and Bruce and I met here at my home, and we were supposed to start on the music for the Megantic Outlaw. And we spent a couple of hours, and we had a couple of beers, and we played some tunes, and then we got a really good strong opening motif and a really fine slow air. And at the end of that, Michael clapped his papers closed and said, "Well, this is ridiculous. We should have had this done by now. This is ridiculous." And so he showed up at band practice the next weekend with the whole concert scored out, harmonies, everything. Now you can't make that happen. You can't make that happen. That just comes with raw and natural skill. I talk about this in the memoir about composition of music and composition of pipe music. There are so many interesting points to be made about that. First of all, nobody knows how or why somebody can compose music. We all know the guy who brings a tune and everybody says, it's okay. And the minute his back gets turned, it's thrown into the bin. So that's not going to do the job. You need to have that. And I don't know how to define it, and I don't know where it comes from. But a lot of smart people, great people, have an idea of that. Neil Young says, in his high little voice, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know where it comes from. Sometimes you just go fishing and you drop a line in the river and you get one. Okay. I think
more to it than that. And it was the composition, but the arrangements as well. It was the brilliance of the original material, but the way that it was all arranged.
Yeah, but that's because of all of the musicians in the band, front, center, and back. I mean, it was a hell of a team.
So, I mean, really, let's talk a little bit about the midsection and the drum corps, because that was also innovative at the time.
Well, there wasn't much of a midsection at all. It really, what it was Luke Allen, who really deserves an enormous amount of credit for how we played, because he was a phenomenon, an absolute amazing man, a difficult guy to be sure, but wonderful, funny, and music tumbling out of him. I don't think he even knew what he was doing, because it was just so intuitive and instinctive. I remember Alex Duthert was once quoted as saying that Luke Allen was the greatest pipe band drummer in the world. Now, that ain't faint praise. And he made such a huge difference to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the band, I guess the Frasers really became quite well regarded globally for the role of the midsection, into the 90s, and the sort of innovation that was happening then.
Well, that's right. Tyler Fry was a pupil of Craig Cahoon's, and Craig came to me and said, I want Tyler Fry to play swinging tenor. And I said, oh, really? And one of the senior members of my pipe corps took me aside and said, Bill, you're not seriously thinking of having a swinging tenor in the band. Well, we did it. And there it is. There it is now. I mean, he's made this incredible worldwide challenge for tenor drummers.
Yeah.
And they're good. They're good. I mean, if you have to rest for 3/4 of a bar and then hit that 1/8 note, that's not easy. That requires thinking.
Yeah. No, it was bleeding edge, and now we see so many bands around the world.
Everybody's doing it now. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing that always struck me about the Frasers was, as you've mentioned, some of the, incredible solo, successfully pipers that played in the solos, in the 80s and 90s. And, that must have, it was a virtuous circle, I suppose, of having pipers like Michael and Bruce going on to win big solo piping prizes, and then also building up the entire Ontario scene with this complement between solo piping and the success of grade 1 bands. How do you see that now in Ontario?
Well, first of all, you're right. Michael and Bruce got on the bandwagon to go to Scotland to compete in solos, and they were both incredibly good, and we all know their talents and their skills as players. But other than them and me, there was nobody else in the band who had an interest in solo piping at the highest level. So I don't know that it influenced very many people. When we were talking before doing this interview about people, you mentioned Ian Kay and Sean McEwen and Andrew Hayes, but they came along sometime later, and they all became my private pupils. I hardly have any pupils, but if I can get a pupil like Ian K. McDonald, I'm taking him, and I don't charge for it. I just want to do it. So I'm not sure how any of that really reflected on the solo situation. So right now in Ontario, I'm not terribly hopeful about the solo piping situation. We've got Ian Kay, we've got Sean McEwen, got Andrew Hayes, got Andrea Boyd, and from there, there's a drop. Mm-hmm. And I judged an online PPBSO grade 1 competition recently, and it was, when I think back to what grade 1 was many years ago, Jim McGilvery, Scott McCauley, Andrea Boyd, I mean, people who could play and who were ready to go to the next level. I didn't hear that. Now, that may simply be because the really good guys don't want to bother with an online solo competition. I don't know. I'll certainly give them the benefit of that doubt. But what I heard was not terribly encouraging.
I wonder what it was, and I would say, like Sean, for example, is a contemporary of mine. When we were going through, I remember competing against him coming up from the Maritimes to play at Maxville. There was a real, I think, camaraderie amongst us as teenagers, and that we all wanted to be there, and there was just great friendship in all of it, and there was a great philosophy that we just loved piping and pipe band music and listening to recordings and being inspired by what, the world's recordings from Scotland and those sorts of things. How do you think we can inspire the next generation, to share that love and that passion that we all have?
Well, I know Chris is listening on the side to this, and I think that the answer has to be, for us in Ontario, it has to be the PPBSO who takes the bull by the horn and recognizes that they can no longer be merely a Highland Games running association, because that's what they've become. Mm-hmm. There's a desperate need for teaching, and the answer is so obvious. Look to Scotland. The school system has churned out people that are so good, so well taught, so well trained. They know how to play, they know how to blow the bagpipe, and so on. Now, we can't do that because it's not our national instrument. I mean, if you wanted to go to the government and say, well, give us money for all these schools, they'd say, well, why not Ukrainian dance or something? Because that's really how they think. And so it has to be the PPBSO who just gets going and gets teaching and cells of teaching all over Ontario under a kind of a curriculum put together by the PPBSO that teaches pipers and drummers every level that they have to achieve before they can get their diploma of whatever it happens to be. Look at this. There are so many bands now in Scotland with great young players, and that's all because of the school system. Now, in North America, there are really only a couple who do that. And it's interesting to look in depth at what they do. You've got SFU. Okay. Do you know that there have been 2,000 people come through SFU's teaching program? 2,000.
Just incredible.
It's unbelievable. And recognize as well that all of this is tied to Jack and Terry and Reed. That's their living. So they're tied to the program, and they're tied to teaching kids and bringing them into the big band. It's an amazing system. But unless you have something like that, and the PPBSO could do it, it's not going to work. Look at Dunedin. Ian Donaldson, my pipe sergeant for a million years, and a lovely guy. So he's running that band, but it's his living. So they've got a grade 1, 3, 4, and 5. SFU has grades 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I mean, it's an army of young people dying to play, and that's where we are falling down.
And we're seeing Ian McDonald in Saskatchewan has built a great program in Regina and with the Conservatoire children's program there, and Bruce and in Nova Scotia, and James McCaddy in PEI and Trevor Kellogg down in Cape Breton, you know, the piping is and drumming is thriving in other areas of the country. Now, I know that we are, the PPBSO is starting to implement PDQB training and examinations, and that's going to be terrific to help drive this, to drive momentum for training. But a question that came up when we did our first webinar with Finlay McDonald, you know, a big successful program of the Piping Centre has been the National Youth Pipe Band of Scotland. And the question was asked, do you think that there could be a National Youth Pipe Band of Ontario? Do you think a project like that would inspire young people?
I guess my answer is the obvious one. If it inspires people in Scotland, and they're not much different from us, then it would inspire people here. Kids want to participate. Kids want to learn stuff. Kids are learning that pipes and drums are cool because they're weird and they're outside and all of that. I mean, I think it's possible. Mm-hmm. But really, the first thing that has to happen is an intense teaching program. I mean, I know there are pockets of people teaching. I mean, Bob Worrell teaches all the time. Jim McGilby, I think, does teaching. But I'm talking about saturating the market with a real organizational impact.
Yeah, absolutely, and it needs to be. We've got tremendous instructors and capable teachers in Ontario, but we need to have more volume and more volume.
Volume, yes.
People. Yeah.
You need the critical mass, I think, Andrea, because people will start, and I don't know how many will survive, but if 100 kids start, 2 might survive and do well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know what the ratios are. I have no idea.
So, I mean, I think we're all feeling, the effects this summer of not being able to gather, not being able to go to the games, and perhaps losing a sense of that kind of the collective. What, lots of organizations, including the PPBSO, are organizing virtual competitions. I wonder, we are very focused on competition as the main vehicle for promoting our instrument and moving people forward with the instrument. How do you have any ideas about how we could get through this COVID over the next year to promote piping and encourage gathering that isn't just about competition?
Boy, I think you've landed on fallow ground. I don't have any ideas. I really don't. I don't know how you get over this. We're all isolated. We're all separated. Andrew, you know all about this. There's no substitute for sitting in a bar. A couple of people have tunes. Mm-hmm. Everybody has a pint. Somebody else gets up and has a tune. You can't do that in this awful situation. So how do you get around that? I mean, I did the grade 1 online competition. It was very sterile. I mean, people were playing and I could adjudicate it, and that's all fine. But it just seems it's not the same. And piping to me has always been about my friends, and the people who love what I love. So
absolutely.
I don't know how you get around that.
It's the community. Mm-hmm. Well, I think I've seen a lot of us are reminiscing about years past and great memories, and we do have a couple questions from our audience today, and one of them is from a good friend, Michael Gray, who has asked, what is your most joyful memory in your piping career? And what is your funniest memory in your piping career?
Trust Michael. Trust Michael. Now you have to understand, I've known Michael since he was a baby boy. He was 16 when he started coming to me for tuition. So I've seen him through many, many years and many sort of transmogrifications of his personality, and where he is now is as perfect as it ought to be. So, greatest memories. People who ask me that question expect me to say my first gold medal or my first class or the world's championship. And look, all of those things are wonderful. The world's championship is different from the others in that it is something that you share with your friends, your bandmates. But gold medals and clasps are very internal. There's great pride in having achieved it, but you can't go and share it with a whole lot of people, because many of them who hear you coming up to talk about your gold medal don't want to hear about it. God damn it! So there's that. But let me say that going to Live in Ireland in Glasgow a couple of years ago and having the greatest cast of piping and drumming geniuses on the stage under not just my direction, but under the influence of the 78th Frasers ethic and approach to music was unbelievable. I will never ever forget it. I mean, who did we have? We had nobody. And Richard Parks, we had Stuart Little, we had Alan Tully, we had, it goes on. We had Ian Duncan. Oh, it was crazy, and everybody was on side with the thing. And we didn't play like these folks played. We played like the band of the 80s played. It was all sort of full balls to the wall, go for it, energy, and that really was an amazing thing. And I'm looking back and I'm seeing Steve Crichton and all these great drummers playing, and everybody's just playing like mad. It was, oh man, it was something else. And the love and the camaraderie amongst the people was wonderful. I can remember Alan Tully coming to me and saying, "This is so different, Bill, because when I see Richard Parks on the games field, I think, there's my enemy. I have to kill him today." He said, "But it isn't that way right now." Well, just it's probably a one-off thing that may never ever happen again. But so that's my happiest moment. What did Mike want to know? The funniest moment?
Funniest moment.
Well, I've had lots and lots of funny moments. There's a guy who played in the gold medal at Oban on the stage at the Corn Halls, and he had a set of dentures which didn't go well with the blowpipe, and the thing jumped out of his mouth and went clack, 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 across the stage. Now that was funny, but cruel. But Lily and Michael and I, and there might have been Jim McGilvery too, maybe even Andrew Berthoff. We were coming back from Inverness, and Michael was in the back seat, and he was, his legs were restless, and he was moving them around. And he said to me, "Billy, what's that smell?" I said, I don't know, but it's awful." So we got to Pitlochry, and Michael got out of the car and adhered to the bottom of his shoes was a good 2 inches of dog feces, which he had been smearing all over the
back seat
of that car. And we stopped at a very fancy place, and Michael went in and used the guest washroom to wash his shoes of this foul excrement. It was really hilarious.
You were able to carry down the road.
After that,
that's good. Well, we've got we're running out of time rapidly. This hour has just flown by. We have a few questions from the audience watching, and this was kind of a carry on from the earlier question. Glenna is asking, do you prefer competition or concerts? And maybe you can't choose, but do you have a preference to competitions or concerts?
In terms of artistic satisfaction, concerts are infinitely superior. The thing about competition is that it's such an intense thing to do. It's nerve-wracking. I was the worst competitor in the world for performance anxiety. If I ever played once on the boards the way that I could play in this room where I'm talking from, it would have been a different story. But there was great satisfaction in both.
Yes. I've got another question from Charles David Mitchell. Do you think that modern compositions from the likes of Chris Armstrong, Lincoln Hilton, Scott Wallace, and other lesser-known composers will begin to appear in band and solo competitions in the future? So, modern composers appearing in band and solo competitions, do you think that will happen soon? Or is it happening already?
That's a tough one. But that's the kind of thing that inevitably people say, no, that's for concert work, not for competition. And the reason is that everybody is frightened. And the reason everybody is frightened is because of the World's Championship. And that means that whatever people play at the World's Championship to win is what gets duplicated throughout the world piping. And so we get narrower and narrower. And I mean, there's so many modern compositions. I mean, Michael and Bruce are the closest to me for that kind of thing. And they're great. They're just great composers. So I would never object to it. But I don't see it happening quite so easily.
Is it time for the world to change the format, or is it time for us to determine how we value or adjudicate what the best bands in the world are?
Oh my God Almighty! Have we got another 2 hours? I don't think it's going to happen, Andrea. I saw the survey on pipe strums. And there's very little enthusiasm for changing the formation or much of anything. People like being in a circle. God knows why. I don't. I like being a performer. I like looking at my audience. And you're driving the sound of 22 pipers straight at them. I think that's fabulous. But I don't see it happening because there doesn't seem to be any desire for it amongst pipers.
Yeah, from the leadership in that area. We've got one final question here, and this comes from Glenn Howie, and he's asking a question about, that we use organizations like cadets and youth organizations, school programs to promote piping and drumming. Do you have other ideas about other types of organizations or other formations that could help us inspire and cultivate piping and drumming?
I do. I think that the PPBSO can create a teaching system which puts young people into bands or groups graded from, doesn't matter what, 4, 3, 2, and 1, and put them through those things. Sure, you can make them air cadets, and you can do. I was a cadet myself, but that isn't what made me play bagpipes. My father made me play bagpipes because he made me love them. So I think that's I think that's the difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Structure, I don't think really necessarily dictates outcome.
It's the motivation and the lever.
Yes. You got to find a way to make kids love it.
Mm-hmm. You do. Well, hopefully, with the PDQB program being adopted in Ontario, and people like Bob Worrell really leading the charge on that, and Kyle Heaney, and certainly other members of the PPBSO and Music Committee promoting the examinations and the syllabus. Hopefully that will be a start for what we can see. So we don't have any more questions here.
Let me tell you something.
Sure.
There are so many wonderful moments in piping with pipers and with friends. There was a time many years ago. We were driving back from Inverness, Lily and I, and we had Scott McCauley with us in the car, and he pulled out a cassette of the Furies. And I don't know if you know the Furies, I'm sure you do. And he played Finbar Fury's version of Sweet 16. I don't know if you've ever heard it.
I'm not sure about that one particularly.
Oh,
I'll have to look it up.
It's so heartbreaking, and it's so pure Celtic, and he's playing, I think, a banjo or a ukulele to do the introduction, and he sings this thing in the typical Irish folky way. It's not elegant, it's not a refined voice. It's just his heart coming out. And I loved you as I loved you when you were Sweet 16. Now, all three of us had to pull over because we were crying. That's what piping and drumming can do for you.
It's true. Yeah, it stirs an emotion and a friendship and a camaraderie.
Things you never forget. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, Bill, I think that's a good way to end our session this afternoon. And thank you so much for your time, your insights, your memories, your influence on so many of us, not just in Ontario, but certainly me growing up in Nova Scotia, and many people all around the world that you have influenced over your vast career that is in no way over yet. So thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Andrea.
And I'd just like to say that we'll be having more of these webinars to come over the summer, and we'll be making announcements soon about what's coming up on the schedule in August. So if you'd like to watch this webinar again or to see past webinars, so far we've featured conversations with Finlay McDonald, with Bob Worrell, and with Andrew Lawson. You can watch those all again through links on the PPBSO website and our Facebook pages. There's also a seminar led by Tyler Bridge on tips and tricks for preparing for virtual competition, and you can sign up for the PPBSO online competitions as well at the PPBSO website. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, Andrea. Bye.